but we still have more to go. We're really looking forward to this panel, and this session is brought to you by KBR, and we very much are thankful for their sponsorship. This session will be led by Dave Pierce, and Dave, as most everyone knows, is the director of WALP's flight facility. He leads their suborbital and their launch range services, working with commercial, working with government, whatever is needed in order to help get hardware into space. And so, Dave, we really appreciate everything you do down there, but over to you for this fascinating panel, please.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to be the moderator for this esteemed panel to have a conversation about how we enable low-cost, high-return science missions. We just had a brilliant session talking about flagship and James Webb, and Mark just led a terrific panel. And you might be sitting there thinking that nothing could be further from that than what we're getting ready to talk about. And I would say not so fast, that missions like James Webb or Hubble Space Telescope, they start with low cost, high risk, high return science missions. Just to remind you that Dr. John Mather started out as a balloon scientist, as a graduate student, working with Paul Richards. And it's the craft that our science community has learned doing these missions that have enabled flagship missions. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting an Explorer mission that had science instruments that didn't start out in suborbital. So just really excited to have this panel discussion. I first want to introduce our panel, but thanks to KBR for sponsoring this session. And before I say any more, Jim, thank you for your leadership and for hosting us today, for the executive director of AAS and all your work that you've done to put together the Robert H. Goddard Symposium. So I want to introduce Dr. Robin Millen, professor of physics and astronomy at Dartmouth University. I want to introduce Dr. Elisa Quintana, astrophysicist at NASA Goddard. I also want to introduce Luis Santos, our small sat office chief engineer at NASA Goddard. And finally, Sarah Roth, our chief technologist in the balloon program located at NASA Wallops. So again, we have a world-class panel here to have a great conversation. And just to set the stage, I have a couple slides. The benefit of this conversation starts with a suborbital program, which is central to how NASA enables low-cost, high-return science missions. There are several key advantages, but not to get too far ahead of the conversation, I just want to highlight a few of them. One, the suborbital program provides a unique platform for groundbreaking science. It achieves altitudes and negligible seeing and absorption compared to ground or aircraft. It's low cost and it's got a rapid cycle characteristic for purpose-built specific instruments where scientists can take higher risk and focus on a problem for high return. The near space environment, we can get there at a fraction of a spacecraft and launch cost of a flight project. They provide a great test bed for spaceflight instruments. As you know, many of the instruments flying on spacecraft today first started as precursor instruments flying on suborbital platforms. And the platforms for low-cost, high-risk missions include balloons, scientific balloons, sounding rockets, our CubeSats and small sats, commercial rideshare, coupled with NASA programs like Astrophysics Pioneers that Elisa is a PI in. Low-cost missions that allow us to really try hard, where a scientist can design, build, test, integrate, personally oversee I&T, mission operations, all in a very short period of time. That's why it's vital. Additionally, these programs are so important for growing early career team members and PIs for the future. We're creating hardware savvy PIs, which is so key to ensuring the future of technology and science in the United States. So our panel is going to discuss this ecosystem today, and we're really excited for you to be here with us. So as you can see, there's a lot happening in this domain. And these folks have been in the trenches. They've been working it for years. They have the battle scars to prove it. And we're going to tell you a little bit about why we're doing it and where the future is headed. So I'd like to start first with Sarah.
Thanks, Dave. So I was asked to give you a little bit about my background, and they're going to put up a slide here with my bio in a minute. Okay, cool. So you can read that if you like, but I'll tell you that it's been a weird journey. So I started my professional career, if you will, after high school, teaching grades 5 through 12 band. So I know you're all like, what the hell are you doing here? But interesting enough, if you want to talk offline about this, the connection between math and music is like, so we can talk about that. Anyway, through several twists and turns, I ended up going back to school for engineering. Always loved public service, and so I was really grateful to get an internship at Goddard Greenbelt, and then another one at Wallops. And I've stayed at Wallops ever since. Been 8 years now. Really love what we do down there, and working my way from intern all the way now to chief technologist. So really, the best part of my job right now is getting to develop things like this, and that's our technology roadmap for the next several years. We've been going through iterations of this roadmap. Probably every 6 months, things change a little bit, and you're really familiar with how quickly things can change. But we're doing some really exciting things. Probably the biggest is looking into changing from using only helium as our lift gas to now supplementing with hydrogen or going all the way to hydrogen. Because if you follow the news, we've got huge issues with supply and cost. We're looking at trajectory control just to bias the trajectories of our big balloons. We're looking at increasing our telemetry capabilities and utilizing commercial platforms like Starlink and OneWeb, and even digging into optical communications. We're always looking for lighter weight batteries, more efficient solar panels. And then of course, we're taking all of these desires, right, and trying to fit it into the lightest weight package and at the lowest cost to our customers. So it's definitely a challenge, and it's very, very, very interesting. And with that, I'm gonna pass it to Luis.
Well, at least
No, Lisa. Okay.
Sure, I'll go next because of the order of the slides. I'm Elisa. I'm an astrophysicist at NASA Goddard. I have a very non-traditional background. I come from the California Community College system, where I didn't know I wanted to do anything in STEM, until I was in my mid-20s. But I ended up going into physics. I worked at NASA Ames. I did my postdoc there. I worked on the Kepler mission. That was the first big mission that I was exposed to. And so I worked alongside the PI. I knew it was something I wanted to do. It was really exciting, but I didn't think it would be something I could do until, I was old, like, like the PI. And so I really, really am a huge fan of these, small platforms where we can really give people experience. I've been to my share of workshops for how to create a more diverse workforce and women in PI roles or management roles. And it always comes down to you need experience. And so all of these, they are high risk, but you can do lots of them, and you can give a lot of people that stepping stone, that John Mather had, I guess, a while back. And so I'm happy to talk more about the mission I lead, which is called Pandora. I guess, let's see. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so briefly, I am working on this mission. It's part of the Astrophysics Pioneers program. It's a new program by NASA where they wanted to find something that was a little bit bigger than these sort of APRA-type tech development and smaller than your smallest mission. And so something, it's a $20 million cost cap mission, strict 5-year program. And what is really nice about this is that we have been able to have over half of our leadership roles filled by early career scientists. Here's us at Wallops when we had our very first concept. We did a mission planning lab at Wallops, and one of the reasons we're successful is we had a lot of institutional support. So Goddard is fantastic in helping provide mentorship and a lot of resources. I just wanted to highlight our team. And so again, I think why this has worked is because we've been able to have both experienced team members and early career team members sort of in a matched role. So that's kind of half and half. And so we're doing something a little bit novel where we have the early career person be the lead. So I'm not early career, but I'm a new PI. Our deputy project scientist is early career. We have our instrument scientist early career, and then we have some people like someone from the James Webb Space Telescope who's had decades of experience mentoring them. And so this is a nice match where that's worked really well. And so I'd be happy to talk about that more. But this is what I've been focusing my last few years on, and we really want to show that it works because we want to have this happen a lot more.
Do you want to talk about any? Just kidding. All right. Like Dave said, my name is Luis Santos. I'm the chief engineer for the small sat office at NASA Goddard. We were expecting early careers and students, which I see a lot of young people here. So they asked me to talk about my personal journey at NASA. So instead of going through my bio, I'm just going to go through my personal journey, which kind of touches into all that. So I was a mechanical engineering student at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. We have an alumni here. I did 2 internships at Goddard when I was in college in the 543 branch, mechanical engineering branch, which when I graduated, then I moved into, they hired me. So I started working in the mechanical engineering branch at Greenbelt. Back then I worked on concept missions, composite crew module, and an altered lunar lander study to really understand what we wanted to do when we go to the moon, what we'll be looking at, and a conceptual design for helping the agency define all that. So then around 2008, I moved down to Wallops looking for a more affordable place to live in my early career. And I moved down to the mechanical systems branch, and that's when I first got exposed to CubeSats. So while I was there, I kept working on the lunar lander study, a composite crew module, and eventually moved on to the GPM high gain antenna system, which, if you don't know, GPM is a large spacecraft, not a CubeSat. But then we started, hearing about CubeSats and how universities are doing CubeSats very cheaply, and we really wanted to understand more about what that was all about. So we had Wallops 6U CubeSat development. It was more internal, and we have some IRADs, internal research and development, to really understand what these CubeSats were all about. And in addition to that, I worked on technology developments, got 4 patents on small sat technologies. I also started my systems engineering master's degree and finished when I was at Wallops. In about 2014, that's when I got my first real CubeSat mission with Dellinger. And that was also an attempt to really understand what it takes to build one and fly one. And this is the first 6U CubeSat to be developed that way. The Wallace one was more of a learning experience. At the end of the day, we didn't actually fly it. So for Dellinger, they were looking at multidisciplinary people in order to save cost. So, a single person that you can find full-time, you can fund full-time and then work different disciplines. So with that in mind, on Dellinger, I was the deputy project manager, the mission systems engineer, the bus lead, the INT manager, and the mechanical lead. So very, very interesting experience, but that got me such a great exposure that I was one of the leading engineers at the center working on these platforms. So eventually, I was then the mission systems engineer for HaloSat, PetitSat, and GTOSat. Because of that experience, I was already, mentoring people and helping different missions and proposals and, working different things, technologies within SmallSat. So when the SmallSat office was created and they were looking at a chief engineer, I was kind of a natural fit to go into that position. So that's how I got from my mechanical engineering degree at the University of Puerto Rico to where I am today as the SmallSat office chief engineer. Now, the SmallSat office is located at Wallops physically, but people working in the office are from Wallops and Greenbelt. Personally, I'm at Greenbelt, but it's for the entire center. In terms of my duties, we do look from the office perspective at the developments that are happening at Goddard. So we touch on, we looked over the portfolio that Goddard has, but we also looked at the technologies that we developed and proposals and things like that. So almost anything related to SmallSats, we are at least aware of it, but we're part of it. Another side of the office, we also do portfolio management for astrophysics and heliophysics at the headquarters level at SMD. So as a chief engineer, I also oversee that portfolio from the technical standpoint. And then finally, in addition to all this, we worked on community outreach. And in this case, I want to bring to your attention the SmallSat Learn Forum, which we lead for the entire agency. And in this case, LEARN stands for Learning from Experience, Achievements, and Resolution Navigation. Unfortunately, the audience is just limited to NASA-funded missions. So if you're a project manager, principal investigator, or a systems engineer from a NASA-funded mission, feel free to join us. And the main thing that we want to achieve with this forum is information exchange, just knowledge exchange. We're funding many missions, all of them are learning, and we want to learn from each other. We don't want that learning to just be at those pockets. We want to be able to share with the community. So the way that we're doing this, we started last year with bi-monthly virtual meetings in which we come in, we have 3 missions that present an overview of their mission and what kind of vendors they're using, what kind of internal developments they have, lessons learned, and just talking about their experience. And then we go into a community discussion to discuss pretty much any topic SmallSat related that the community wants to talk about. In addition to that, we have the yearly in-person gathering. The first one happened last year in October at Wallops. The next one most likely is going to be in October at Langley. And then finally, we have in addition to the website, we have a LinkedIn group that you can join, and then the community can ask questions, talk to each other. So again, we're trying to facilitate the community to talk to each other. I put out the website here, so if you have time, want to take a picture, just access the website. That's how you can ask to be added to the distribution list. Of course, we're going to be looking at, what is the mission that you're working on or you've been working on. You can also access the schedule for the virtual meetings and the in-person gathering. And we also have a session archive. And for the archive, you don't have to be a member. You can go in there and there's an archive of presentations and they're open to the public. So as a minimum, if you're not a a PI, a project manager, or a systems engineer for a NASA-funded mission, you can look at the session archive. And with that, I'll pass it to Robin. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Robin Millen, and I use balloons and CubeSats in my research. And I got into that business. I was actually an astronomy and a physics major as an undergrad, and I had an opportunity to build a radio telescope at Berkeley when I was an undergrad. And that's where I discovered that I not only love the science, but I also love building things. And so balloons, CubeSats, rockets, I think offer a really amazing opportunity for people to really get their hands on the hardware. And so my research, I'll just give you a quick overview and try to emphasize that I think the suborbital and CubeSat missions are really critical tools for the science that we do, and oftentimes are really enhancing the science. They can work with our larger strategic missions and enhance the science. I think we saw some of that yesterday with the CubeSat that was supporting the DART mission, and that's true in a lot of science disciplines. So I study near-Earth space because I see it as a laboratory for studying the physics of space. So the processes that are occurring in space plasmas or the ionized gases that are so common in our universe. And we can access them very easily in our own radiation belts, for example, shown here. Of course, all of the magnetized planets in our solar system have radiation belts. And we can speculate that exoplanets perhaps have radiation belts as well. And we can learn a lot. Of course, all those systems are different, but we can learn a lot about the physics by going to our very own. And those radiation belts, you can see they have a kind of donut shape here from this schematic. And so the radiation belts actually extend down to our atmosphere. And the suborbital missions are really critical for giving us information about that low altitude extension of the radiation belts. In particular, particles that rain down on our atmosphere from the radiation belts, we can study how that happens. And so that's true of balloons, rockets, and CubeSats. I've been using balloons and have a CubeSat project going on right now. And in particular, we worked with the Van Allen probes mission, and both CubeSats and balloons were really critical for Van Allen because an equatorial spacecraft like the Van Allen probe shown here can't actually resolve that low altitude extension of the radiation belts. So those missions worked together to really enhance the science. So over the past decade or so, my team has launched, we built 45 balloon payloads and launched them 58 times. So some of them launched multiple times, in addition to several test flights we did before that. And I want to actually thank Dave because this project would not have been possible without him. The picture shown there in the launch is actually from our very last flight right before COVID hit us. And that balloon actually stayed up for 100 days on a small superpressure balloon. And so we're able to collect fairly long-term data from this platform and look at those particles coming in from the radiation belts. And that project involved just dozens and dozens of students. I think at one point, my graduate student figured out we had to drill 10,000 holes for each campaign that we did. So we used lots of students, but they were able to really get in there on day one and start drilling. And of course, we got really great science results as well. As follow-up mission to that I'm currently involved with is called BOOMS. That's actually led by John Sample at Montana State University. And it's using some of the same detectors we used on Beryl, the spectrometers, in addition to some imaging or some X-ray cameras. And so we're going to be studying the spatial structure of the stuff we looked at with Beryl. And this is a larger balloon payload, and it carries 7 pairs of the Beryl spectrometers and then these X-ray cameras. We were supposed to launch in Antarctica this past year, but unfortunately COVID shut down most of the flights down there. So we're going to be going to Sweden, we hope, in 2024. Also, the PI on a CubeSat mission called REAL, and this is studying, looking at both the energy and angular distribution of those particles that are coming into our atmosphere. And this is the main instrument, or the only instrument on REAL, is a really novel, compact, miniaturized particle detector that was built by APL. And it is really going to enable us to learn a lot of detail about those distributions, measurements that have never been taken before. And we're about ready to start, the instrument's finished, we're ready to integrate it later this spring, and hopefully we'll be launching that later in the summer or early fall. And I just want to mention that instrument formed the basis for the instrument that we're using on a SMEX concept that we just submitted as a proposal this fall. So that development that we did for this CubeSat is really enabling an Explorer class mission. And I'll just add to that that I think the training that I have gotten through both the balloon project that we did, this was a large balloon project, and then learning more about space hardware with the CubeSat really enabled me to lead the team to put together what I think is a really strong proposal. I'm partnering with APL, and that was a partnership that we developed through the CubeSat project. So these missions really not only give us really great science return, but they're also a foundation for building the next step.
Thanks, Robin. So Sarah, I want to start with a question to you. What advice do you have as you have this leadership role of looking at the future of this platform that's so important and looking at the technology roadmap? What advice do you have to our early career folks as well as our IRAD folks on maturing technologies on platforms like balloons to support high-risk, high-return science missions? And how do you see the benefit of this in terms of lowering the risk or the cost for infusing in a flight project later?
So I guess in terms of advice for the individual, you're talking about personal advice, like persistence is probably the best tool in your toolbox. And maybe sometimes being willing to just send an email or call somebody that you don't know that probably have the answer. 99.99 times out of 100, they're going to answer you, right? They're not really that scary and unapproachable. And in terms of our platforms, I think universally at Wallops, because it's a really quick turnaround and they're a little bit high risk, but they're much lower cost, we're able to add things that are a lower TRL level that just need a little bit of assistance in maturing the technology. And specifically, this is easy on balloons. We have an annual engineering test flight. We have 4,000 to 5,000 pounds available for suspended mass. So if you've got something that's like 50 pounds, you're completely closed system and you just need a flight, you need to be in the actual flight environment, you want to test something out, well, it's a great place to be. We had an IRAD last year, 21, what year is it? Yeah, 2021. It was a follow-on from 2019. And it actually, so we were measuring the relative winds aloft in the stratosphere. And in that regime, it's actually a really great analog to the Mars atmosphere. So this anemometer was actually designed for a Mars rover. And so they got to advance the TRL of their technology while also helping us get data on the relative winds aloft, which is a key component to our trajectory control test. So it really was a great benefit for everybody in that regard.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. Hey, Louise, what opportunities do you see and also the barriers and how you're trying to address barriers with respect to expanding small sats? As we leave LEO, we do more deep space missions. And how are you optimizing like your investments? How are you managing the risk of these small missions? And how are you addressing policy changes, reviews, testing? And ultimately, what's your risk posture that you're maturing in that domain of small missions? We've been doing small missions now since 2011, thereabout, and we've shown that they do real science. So, I mean, how are you managing all that risk across your portfolio?
That's a very loaded question. There was a lot on that one, but in terms of how I see things moving forward and where we're going, we know where we've been and trying to mature these technologies and getting it to a place that we can do real science, or at least compelling science on these platforms, CubeSats and small sats. And we can look at it from different perspectives. From a technical perspective, we want faster communication, more processing on board, just more capable systems. And with that, then you're going to need more power. You're going to need better thermal management for the power that you need. And then all that um, brings the services that we give to the payloads to a whole new level. So now the payloads are more capable because they get fed with more capability in terms of power, communication, that kind of thing. In terms of processing, not only processing, but also fast data communication, not with other assets, but even within the satellite, between components, so you can capture very, very large amounts of data in very short amount of time. So that's, it's useful for capturing the data, but also when you have something like laser communication and you need to dump that data as fast as you can. And then in addition to that, artificial intelligence, machine learning, those are the new things coming up, and those are going to be very useful. We have developments in that area as well. In terms of how we use them, they have multiple ways of being used. One could be figuring out automatically or autonomously the best path for your data to go from different places if you have a network of assets. But also from the science perspective, you could be looking at a broader picture and then identify important things that you want to pay attention to autonomously. You don't want to rely on getting all the data down, humans observing everything and making decisions, because by the time that you realize, oh wait, we should have seen that, well, the time already passed, so you really missed the opportunity. So you want these intelligence systems to be able to identify those things and focus their resources to analyzing what needs to be analyzed. And then onboard processing as well, it will be good to also process the data so you minimize the amount of data that you got to get down. And then, of course, constellations is the main thing for small satellites, and being able to do things that we have never been able to do before because of the sheer amount of assets that you can get up there. And not only a constellation of small sats, but distributed systems in which you have multiple small sats working in conjunction with larger assets, with ground assets, and everything working towards the same goal. So that's where I see things going. Regulatory-wise, I know the proliferation of small sats, that's creating a big problem, and how we deal with that. It is a difficult problem, and something has to be done about it. But at the same time, some policies directed to trying to control that better could be hurting the one-offs, because now you have some unique developments that need to comply with many things because of what's happening elsewhere, and that's creating some problems. How we navigate that, it is a difficult problem, and we're looking into that, see how we can better manage it.
Thanks, Luis. Elisa, from your experience, you were one of the very first, or one of the first pioneers TIs. And Pioneers is very innovative in terms of an approach. What's that experience been like? And what have been the barriers or things that you would like to see change going forward as we implement these missions that are not flight projects under 7120.5, but they're not APRA or RNA missions. And so you're in that space in between. So
Yeah, so the Pioneers is innovative. We make a lot of jokes that we truly are pioneering the way through navigating this whole system. When the first Pioneers selections were announced, I think in the press release, Paul Hurt said, like, we don't know if we can do great astrophysics with $20 million. I hope they prove us wrong. And so, I really, really want to commend NASA for doing this program and taking risks. And I think that's navigating this program within NASA, which is an experiment within NASA, and taking advantage of industry and trying to keep up with this flourishing small sat industry. Sort of that connection has been somewhat challenging. Like, we see a lot of programmatic challenges, like it's a strict 5-year program from selection to archiving and publishing, and you can't have 8 months to do a contract. And, we can't have, we need this light touch management. So it's kind of, there's a balance. Institutional support has been really, really important. I meet with my management every other week. Because we are early career, we don't have the clout to, be the resourceful PIs that we need. So sometimes we need some help or some pointers to figure out where to go and some guidance. And so we've had a lot of institutional support. At the same time, we really need light touch management, and we can have the same oversight and reviews and hoops and cost model exercises and all that stuff that goes into the larger missions. And so I think trying to find that right balance of like getting enough support without getting too much that it's a burden and we can't do this thing in 5 years has been pretty challenging. But we've, every time we meet, we take lessons learned, and we're hoping to implement that for the next cycle of pioneers. And so, we're truly paving the way to make this work within NASA.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Robin, you worked for Bob Lynn out at Berkeley. That's how you started. And you've had this incredible experience of development in an arena where it was really about the craft, working together for professors and other researchers, developing hardware, seeing in a very short time frame, seeing it flown. That mentorship that you receive, that Jedi Padawan relationship, right, of taking technology, flying it consistently on balloons, and that kind of paved the way to where you became this barrel PI the first time that a balloon platform was selected under an AO, under Living with a Star, which was very innovative. What do you see as the opportunities or the challenges as now you're a leader in the science community at Dartmouth to spur on student involvement, to generate student mentorship, to pay it forward as what Bob Lynn did for you in your career? And in our new work environment, right, that we're this hybrid work environment that I'm sure Dartmouth was seeing through the pandemic and impacts on projects. How do you see mentorship and what we need to be doing as a science community to ensure that we're training that next generation of John Mathers out there?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, if you look at Bob Lynn's record, he's got some really successful former students, and so that model works. It's been proven, and I think the challenge is making that model more accessible to more people, more places. I think CubeSats have really enabled that to expand. But even an Explorer mission, of course, Bob was leading a SMEX when I was a grad student, so I got to see that whole process. But there are fewer and fewer institutions that can lead a SMEX now. So how do we form partnerships between larger institutions and smaller places to be able to enable those opportunities for our undergraduates? And it's education and outreach is an important thing that NASA does to inspire, as we heard about earlier today. But we're really talking about training the workforce, right? Training, and there is no shortage of students interested in space. I mean, since I've been a professor, I have seen everything that's going on in the commercial sector has just driven a really amazing interest and explosion in space and in computers and AI and all these things. And so the students want that. And I think we need to figure out how can we make sure those opportunities are there. And I just want to echo what Sarah said about, the persistence as well. And I think NASA can really help to make sure that those places survive and are successful. And, our first barrel test flights, the nice thing about balloons and cubes, you can do test flights and you can refly things. And, we had problems with our solar panels, right? And I think we have to expect that doing these kinds of projects where students are building stuff, where we're really pushing the boundaries, that we're going to have failures, and that's part of why we do it, to push the technology forward and to train people. And so I think we want to make sure we find that right balance between how do we support without overburdening these places that are doing these smaller missions.
Mm-hmm. Very much. Do you see it still as relevant given where we're headed as a science community with that both development of technology as well as people?
The suborbital projects, and
Yeah, these
absolutely.
low cost.
Yeah, I think we've seen an explosion of that. I mean, since Beryl was selected, we've got a number of CubeSats doing radiation belt science. We had a really successful rocket, where the PI, Alexa Helford, is in this audience today. She was a postdoc actually on Beryl. So yeah, I mean, I think that, we continue to see those things paying off, those projects paying off, both scientifically and in the science that LAMP was doing, this rocket experiment, is really exciting science, and really showing that there are really certain kinds of measurements you can only do. It's not just that they're small and we can have students work on them, but balloons can carry really heavy payloads that it's just, you can't put those into space for a reasonable cost. So they actually enable new kinds of measurements as well. So I think the importance of the suborbital and small missions really has only increased.
Thank you.
in my humble.
We'd like to invite anyone that has a question now to come up to the microphone. If not, we have others. Oh, here comes Michelle. And Dave.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. It's really, really nice to see all of you this morning. We often get questions that where people say, for example, what is the value of having interns at a government facility like Goddard Space Center? And I know that several of you came through the intern program, and as being a professor, maybe you're recommending the intern program. Could you talk a bit about your experience and how this, maybe what went well, perhaps what could be done better, but how this helped you in your career as a scientist?
Great question. Thanks, Michelle. Does anyone want to talk about interns?
I love interns. I do. So I was one, right? And I kind of credit that internship for giving me the chance to change my career field drastically, right? Having a mentor that could read between the lines of my resume and go, oh, this person is a hard worker and it has the ability to learn, right? Which is sometimes more important than the past experiences that you've had. Because in this job right now, I find myself constantly having to drink through that fire hose and learn something really quick that I have never, ever read about before. You're sitting in a meeting, you're like, I understand the words you're saying, but not the order you're putting them in. And in the balloon program, we love interns. We've got 2 right now. We're going to have 5 in the summer. We're going to have another 2. I mean, we've got them all year round. No, 3, 4. I don't know, right? Half of our lab right now is interns, actually. They do such good work, and they do bring energy, different experiences. We sometimes use them to help us learn things like new social media. And we get good work out of them too. We've got loads of data now on our materials where we needed to have like thousands of samples tested to get a decent sample size to get significant statistical results. And then they even get to publish, right? So you've got interns like our current one who's studying GIS, who now is going to eventually be able to have her name as an author on a materials research paper, right? And shows that she has really good quality lab experience. And then we love having them as new PIs too, because they're learning things like, oh, okay, well, I'm a mechanical engineer and I'm gonna design this box, but I didn't realize I needed to leave a hole in the box for the electrical wires. How do you learn that unless you've done it, right? Unless you've been in the trenches doing it.
Yep. And I mean, I can add a little to that today, since with my 2 internships, as I mentioned in the journey, I was lucky enough that I had a mentor that ever since the first day, he treated me like part of the team. He didn't look down on me. He didn't give me just little things to fill my time. He actually gave me real tasks for the project that he was in charge of. And I think that was critical for the motivation. I did see, unfortunately, other interns at the same time that I was doing my internship that had more not as exciting task, and that did hurt them in terms of the motivation and the willingness to come and work with us. And they recognize the great stuff that we do at NASA and all the interesting work that that we do because they get exposed to it, but unfortunately, their specific project wasn't as exciting. But then I also met other interns that did an internship in private industry or other places before coming to Goddard and do an internship. And they tell me about how good or bad their internships were. So I had some exposure to all that. So once I got the opportunity to be a mentor, I always carry that with me, and I try to mimic my mentor and be more hands-on, giving them real things to do, trusting them to be able to do it, but at the same time checking up on them. I also encourage them to look for answers before coming to me when they were working on something, in the sense that you should be able to, when you're doing something, you should be able to do a quick Google search that could answer your question, or something quick that you can do to keep moving on, and do your own research. I mean, don't spend a day or two wasting your time, right? If I'm here, just talk to me. But at the same time, don't talk to me every 5 minutes for some small stuff, right? So I thought that was also important for them to learn, to be able to fend for themselves and try to look for the answers. And sometimes the answer they found wasn't correct, and we'll fix it and we keep moving on, but it's part of the experience of learning. So yeah, I always carry that with me. So for you in the audience, if you have the opportunity to be a mentor, always keep that in mind. Try to give them something meaningful, trust them, but also keep an eye on them, and just make them part of the team.
And I'll just add briefly, I was an intern in 1997 at Goddard, and it changed my life. Like you'd be so surprised at mentoring someone for 10 weeks, how it can just be totally life-changing and career-changing. And I also wanted to mention another program we kind of made up for our Pioneers mission. We developed a graduate student shadow position, so it's a year-long position for each year of the 5 years. And so we've had a graduate student shadow the project scientist, the instrument scientist, and probably myself for a year, which means they're fully immersed. They go to all the meetings they interact with headquarters. They give my talks, so that's nice. And so I can showcase and let them shine, and it's been amazing. That's been a really good experience.
Great, Lisa. I remember John Grunsfeld saying that he's in the orbiter fixing with his hands up in Hubble, and he has a flashback to being a student on a ladder with his hands up inside a balloon payload, and remembering that all the skills and tool building and approach that he had learned as a graduate student, working with Goddard, served him pretty darn well as he was the Hubble repairman, as we all like to call him. Dave, you have a question?
Yes, I'm going to direct this to Elisa, but if anyone else wants to also answer, it would be very helpful. So, Elisa, if you can think about one lesson you've learned on your journey and how you would advise the next pioneer to use that to get their leadership to relax when they don't have the rigor of the flagship mission behind this plan that you want to execute.
So, one, okay. Yeah, so I guess, the Pioneers is supposed to be light touch management. Because it's over a certain amount of cost, we still are required to do a lot of the internal, this is kind of specific to Goddard, but a lot of the, it can be just as rigorous as, people developing SMEX missions and going through all of those hoops. And so, when I look at other PIs, I won't name names. There are other PIs who have a lot more experience and can just say no and not do things. And that's something, as early career, that seems like something you would never do. But I think being more sort of flexible with how intensive you want to be with maybe allowing a little more risk, and being more flexible and less rigorous with a lot of the processes that go through, each phase of development. which I think we've probably talked about too. And it's probably similar at different, we have some pioneers at academic institutions and they have their own set of challenges. But I think talking with the 4 PIs together for the first round of pioneers, we all have common lessons learned. And I think light touch management is really helpful because we have such a short turnaround, but also being there when we need to. We don't want to always do all the cost modeling.
I want to add, doing this kind of work and being kind of new and people not used to it, especially the risk that we're taking doing these developments, it helps a lot to find those champions, especially those senior champions that agree with the way that you're trying to do business, and having them in your corner is very important. So definitely look out for those.
Yeah, and there is a small set strategic plan, and it talks about how NASA really needs to look at these small missions, as a broad portfolio, and so we can't have like every mission be as rigorous as your SMEXs and other mission of opportunity programs. Like it's okay to fail. It's okay if we don't have 5 levels of procurement review everything we do before we send something out. It's okay for this. And so I think just kind of lightening up all over, because we are doing a new regime. There isn't any documentation in between 7120.8 and 7120.5. We're doing something in between that's not on paper. And so I think helping us navigate that and navigate, the rigidity that NASA's used to for these larger missions.
Thanks. It's really a pipe cleaner for this middle of the road.
Yeah.
Question over here to the left.
So I have another question for Dr. Quintana. Sorry, everybody wants to hear from you. You're all very inspirational on the panel today, and I really appreciate what you're sharing with us. But Elisa, I wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit more about your, you came through the community college system, and I think this community college system is growing and growing, and there's so much potential talent in the community college system, but a lot of the major agencies and universities and programs that are not accustomed to drawing talent from community colleges. So I know there's a new NASA Community College Network. I'm on the advisory board for that, and I just wondered if you could comment a little bit about your perspectives, having started your educational career in the community college system. What are the pools of talent there that maybe are being overlooked or that could be better tapped? And then my other little question is, when did you decide I can be a PI? I can do this. When did you first have that realization? I'm so glad you did. Yes.
So, the first, I'm a huge fan of community colleges. I think they give people second chances that have, that are just as or more talented than people. If I were to take a poll of all of my colleagues and ask them like why they're at NASA, it's either like they have parents that were teachers. They looked at the stars and knew when they were 5 that they wanted to be an astronaut. They've known forever, and they've had a lot of opportunities and support going on. And that's not the case for like the vast majority of people. And so there's a lot of people at community colleges that are often more dedicated because they've gone through a lot of challenges in their life, and they're, there's a lot of good resource there to tap. That I agree, and I'm very fond of this program you're doing to, help connect NASA with the community colleges, and I'm hoping it'll, continue to be successful. Excuse me. So, yeah, my path was kind of all over the place, and I interned at Goddard in 1997, and then it was just a seed that just kind of kept on going. And so I wouldn't say I stumbled into it, but as soon as I knew that I liked physics, and I kind of got more serious, and then I found opportunities and made opportunities. I knew, well, I'm not quite sure when I had confidence to be a PI, but I know that at Goddard, I started at Goddard in 2017, and I remember talking with, I think, someone from the James Webb Project, and he came up to myself and some of the new people, and and asked us like, oh, so what missions, what are your ideas? What missions do you want to lead? And that just like blew our minds, because I was at NASA Ames for 10 years. And like, if I had said I had not to diss Ames, like they're fantastic. It's just, it's not a space flight center like Goddard. They would have been like, that's nice. Like, have fun with that. But I got it, they're like, oh, what do you want to do? And they're serious. And so we started, I had that slide where we started writing on paper, like, wouldn't it be cool, with exoplanets, we get snapshots and they're cost millions of dollars with flagships. But we're like, wouldn't it be great to have a platform, a small sat that could look at it for, 10 days in a row and really get long baseline observations? And those you can do with small sat platforms. And so it just started out with like people at our institutions having confidence in us and having all these resources and the small sat office like Luis runs has tons of resources. And so I think, sometimes you have to kind of like push people and tell them like, it's okay, you have confidence. And yeah, so Goddard's been great for that.
By the way, I
So-
think that's, oh,
I think we
sorry.
have time for one more question, and then we need to, we're between them and lunch. So,
Sorry.
one last quick question. Yep.
I'll make it quick then. Peter
Yes
Knudsen,
or no,
NASA Goddard. As the commercial industry has matured suborbital rocket technologies, is there interest at Wallops in bringing some of these capabilities like Blue Origin or Virgin to Wallops on a commercial basis? And what would that look like in terms of advantaging Wallops programs?
That's a great question. So quickly, so the Science Mission Directorate, we do partner with the Space Technology Mission Directorate to look at how we can bring on and utilize commercial platforms to do science. So we are doing that. Secondly, we're partnering with Rocket Lab at Wallops, which is a venture class company that is now launching. They have a launch schedule for tomorrow night from Wallops. So smaller end missions are being enabled commercially to do science, both at Wallops as well as at the Cape and out at Vandenberg. So thank you for your question.
STMD has that Flight Opportunities Program that leverages commercial platforms.
Including
high-altitude
commercial
balloons and-
balloons.
yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Jim. Absolutely. Thank you very much for